morning, good evening, good night. I always say there are different time zones here in the United States and around the world. And I will be talking to a very important person who will be talking to me about domestic violence and sexual abuse, sexual violence, more so sexual trafficking and so on. And it will be important for you to listen to my guest. And there are some technical issues. You might not see the face of the guest, but she has a lot to talk about, and we'll be going into the meat of the matter very soon as I let my guest into the studio. Hey, Michelle, how you doing?
I'm wonderful. How are you doing?
I'm good. Nice to have you on Canyouth
Thank
Exploration,
you.
your topic in a podcast. I before we go into the meat of the matter, briefly, with Michelle, if you may, just to have that going.
Okay, I'm sorry, you broke up just a little bit.
I was asking, who is Michelle, professionally, if you may.
Uh, Michelle is a healthcare worker, and I am a mother and a community involved representative, and come from a large family. But I'm somebody that you would see when you would go out at your local grocery store
Yeah,
or at a religious organization. I look like everyone else. That's who
I
I
love
am.
that.
Hmm.
I love that.
Hmm.
I love that.
Hmm.
Your childhood. I have to ask my guests
Hmm.
about their child,
Sure.
just to
Yes.
bring things into perspective, because we can have some very, very challenging childhood and
Hmm.
growing past that. So
Hmm.
tell me about your childhood, Michelle.
Well, I'm the youngest of a lot of children, and I come from a large family, like I said. And my father's a medical professional, and my mother supported him in that. And they've been married still for over 60 years.
Oh,
And it was very traditional household where, he went to work, and granted, she helped run his business. He was essentially the breadwinner. He took care of those, masculine things, especially back then,
yeah.
that most men did. And she kept the home and took care of all of us, and did that. It was a very strict home. There was a lot of religion and music and things like that. And there was a lot of philanthropy, giving back, and traveling as a family. But it was very traditional. It was
Oh,
extremely traditional. Yeah.
that's great. So you have had a very an experience of traveling and so on growing up, right?
Yep. Yep. A lot of trips to Jamaica. A lot
Ah,
of trips to those Caribbean islands.
I love it. I love it.
Absolutely
I
loved
love
it.
it.
Hmm.
I love
Good.
you. I love you to sing reggae music. Reggae music.
No, I love reggae music. Well, I have to say, there's something about people that live in the islands. There's such a beauty of freedom and spirit, and
Yeah.
staying in the moment and living in it and enjoying
Oh,
every moment of their life. And I always said, if I could move to the islands, I would.
yeah.
And who knows? I still have time.
Tell you, I put
Yeah.
you on the spot here though. What do you
Hmm.
love most about Jamaica?
The people. There's
Okay.
no question about it. The
Yeah.
people. I mean, everybody is so loving and welcoming, and you know, um, even when they argue, the passion is there, and the
Yeah.
belief in God. And
Yeah. Yeah.
Jamaica is known for their food also, and of
Yeah.
course, we talked about the sweets, but also the fresh food
Yeah.
and the fruits. And there's a passion for cooking, and I just love all of that. I do. I really do.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
amazing. You have gone through sexual violence, I suspect.
Yes.
I'd like to talk a bit about that. Tell me
Okay.
about your sexual violence experience.
Okay. Well, I was married for well over 20 years, and everything I thought was okay for many of those years, over 15, because I also created a home that was very traditional,
Mhm.
raising children, being involved in the school, in the religious organizations and women's organizations.
Yeah.
But I didn't know who I was really married to. I didn't know that there were drugs being used at my wedding. I didn't
Oh,
know, yeah, I didn't know that there were things happening while I was creating this happy life and doing fundraisers at my home, or, holiday dinners and events. And I didn't know that he was off doing things with other people.
Yeah.
And so what happened was in the last few years, I really realized that if I didn't really attach myself to him, that
Mhm.
I would have lost him. And,
Okay.
I realized that again, his attention was in other directions.
Hmm.
And I had a traumatic experience where I lost someone very close to me, and I realized that I really wanted to live my life to its fullest.
Yeah.
And I made the mistake of telling him because I didn't know what that meant to him. Our ideas of that were very different.
Yeah.
And he took me down a path that I did not know existed. I didn't know what what was there. Nobody really does,
Hmm.
except for those that live in it, and that included alcohol and drugs
Yeah.
and um, sexuality and all of that went on. It was something out of a movie,
Right.
and I wasn't the same person who took care of her kids and other people's children versus that. It was like living two different lives,
Right.
and it got to the point where our life only became, because he wanted it only to become, about drugs and alcohol and parties, and
Yeah.
then his trafficking of me throughout those years.
That's where I want to go.
Okay.
Trafficking. Trafficking.
Yes.
How did
Hmm.
this sex trafficking started? Apparently, it's associated with your husband, your
Hmm.
ex-husband.
Yes.
But
Yes.
talk to
My
me about the
ex-husband.
trafficking, the sex trafficking. Sorry.
Well, it started very gradually, and I say it's like the story of, if you put the frog in a pot of boiling water, it's going to jump out,
Hmm.
or if you put it in cold water and you slowly turn up the dial and it gets hot and it starts boiling, the frog eventually dies
Right.
because it doesn't realize it. And that's exactly what happens. Everything started off very mild and slow, and then he was very strategic about turning that dial. And what happened was, um, I had guessed, assumed now, looking back on it, that he was doing all these things without my knowing or without my involvement. And then what
Yeah.
he did was he brought me into his world. And that included, our being in a hotel room, out of town. And I went upstairs and was waiting for him, and he walked in with somebody else.
Oh.
And I
Mhm.
thought it was a random experience, and I said no, and no was never an option for me. I
Yeah.
said it, but he wouldn't accept it. And the more I said no, the more the drugs came out, and there was a lot of coercion, as you can imagine.
Yeah.
And and I was so naive. And looking back on it here, where I'm in a safe spot, I can see what was going on now. But
Yeah.
back then, I didn't. And then, meeting friends and different groups of friends where it was like, I was the prize. It
Right.
was, let me show what I could do for my wife. He put me on display. And, I reference it to being like a circus animal.
Yeah.
And it's, putting me on a table and telling his friends that they could do what they want. And,
Yeah.
he controlled all of it. And even
Yeah.
when they said no, he made sure that the drugs came out and more drinks. And, I never made my own drinks. He made them, his friends made them. So,
Yeah.
and I didn't, I trusted all these people. I thought, in the
Yeah.
beginning, I thought that they were my friends. The guys were
Right.
like my brothers. The women were like my sisters. But it was all, there was an agenda for all of it. And again, I was so naive because I didn't come from that. I came
Right.
from two professionals, and
Mhm.
and I'm a licensed healthcare worker myself.
Yeah.
So, and I was taking care of two children, and all that I was doing, I was still doing that because I had to.
Yeah.
Um, so, I was also very sleep deprived because we would get home and, the sun would be coming up, and I would sleep for a couple of hours, and I'd have to get up and take care of the children in the home.
Yeah.
And he would sleep until, you know, long in the day, and then wake up and want to do it all over again.
Yeah.
So it started very gradually with
Hmm.
that. And then, it was, I want to say, 18 years into our marriage that this started.
Okay.
And it went on between 5 to 6 years.
So,
And mhm,
so it started 18 years into the marriage.
correct.
So, therefore, would you say it was a normal marriage um, within
I
that 18 years
so
until
it appeared normal, and I've talked to a lot of my friends, or some of my friends. Some of them are his friends,
Mhm.
because they have the drugs is still a common factor for them.
Right.
I ran as fast as I could, but
Mhm.
it seemed very normal. Looking back, if you look at the photo albums and the photos and the frames, yeah, it looked very normal. It looked like we were thriving and successful, and all of that. And people would say, "Oh, I envied you," and I was still doing all that I needed to do for a normal marriage. Again, he would disappear from his work, from his business, and people wouldn't know where he was.
Yeah.
And he'd go out to lunch for 3 hours and come back, and so yeah. Other than that, it looked very normal.
Okay.
It looked like a wonderful marriage
Okay.
because I created that home. It's all about the home, really.
Right. You talked about,
Yeah.
well, I read somewhere about strategy, um, of leaving, exit strategy.
Mm.
What are you talking about there? What type of
Hmm.
strategy did you use, in terms of exiting?
For leaving.
Yeah.
Well, I knew that it was getting. I knew that it had gotten really very scary. And what happened was I found out that he wasn't just using the drugs; he was dealing the drugs. And then I knew that physically, emotionally, I was losing like almost my sanity. And I knew that I wasn't allowed to have any sort of money that was separate than his, and I saw money from my account go. So I was in fear mode now at this point.
Yeah.
And they say that fear and faith cannot live together in the same mind, but I disagree with that because I had a lot of fear, but I also have a lot of faith.
Yeah.
And what happened was I tried to form a strategy and get my children to come with me, but they wouldn't come because they didn't want to leave their beds, their games, their
Yeah.
pets. They didn't want to, right? And I knew that they would be okay. I knew that I had to get out. So, I already had, as women, we keep extra shoes in our car and we have a jacket or sweater. So
Yeah.
I
No.
knew, so that sort of thing. But,
Okay.
and nobody knew what was going on. None of my family knew because they were alienated. None of my good friends who I could
Yeah.
trust knew. But eventually I just left.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
got in my car and I left and I went to someone who I trusted and I knew would be okay. And I did that, and I made sure to bring all of my papers, all of my children's papers.
Yeah.
I managed to do that because I didn't know where this guy was headed in his mind or
Yeah.
legally.
Mhm.
So that's what I did.
Okay. Your life before all of this,
Hmm.
right? What was life before this for you, or was life going
Before I met him, or
before you met him? This.
mm. So, well, I was a licensed healthcare worker when I was very young, and I was great at it and successful at it. And I didn't work in this field for 20 years, but I went back 4 years ago, and it's really what saved me. But my life was great back then. I was very close with my family.
Mhm.
After we were together for a few years, he basically alienated me from my family and talked poorly about everybody because he wanted to keep me, separate so he could groom me into this. But before that, I was young and successful.
Right.
And while most people in their 20s didn't know what they were doing with their lives, I
Yeah.
was a professional,
Okay.
and so it was pretty good.
Yeah.
It's very good, actually.
I love that.
Yeah.
What's the age group now? What? I mean, if you care to say, you know,
What? What was what?
what's your age group now?
Oh,
What
I'm
you
in.
can give me between, if you can.
I'm in. It's okay. I'm in my 50s. I'm
Okay.
in. Yeah. I'm in quote unquote midlife, and it's a little tricky because life is starting over again.
Yeah.
Um, I went from family home to a home with him, and so now I'm on my own, which is a little scary, but it's a really good time
Yeah.
to ground myself and get my feet on the ground and to heal myself because that's the
Yeah.
most important. And of course, I'm still, even though my children have gotten to be adults now, I
Yeah.
have one that I'm taking, she's going to college, and the other one,
Okay.
yeah, she's going, yeah, and then the other one, I'm still helping manage him with his life because he's in his young 20s. And
Yeah. Okay.
I'm still the mother I've always been, and I always was.
Mhm.
And no matter what trauma I experienced, I made sure that I got up and I showed up for my children.
Yeah, that's
Um,
important.
Very important.
That's important.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah.
No matter what.
This is Canyouth Exploration. I am Dr. Canyouth White. It's important that you listen to Michelle. She has a lot to talk about domestic violence and sexual violence as well.
Mm-hmm.
But Michelle,
Mm-hmm.
what is the number one piece of advice that you'd
Mm-hmm.
give to a woman who is going through
Mm-hmm.
abuse?
There's so much. Abuse is a spectrum. It's a number line from 0 to infinity. It could be somebody who's just being emotionally abusive. It could be someone that's being, financially abused. The one thing I would say is, there's so much. Trust your gut instinct.
You know?
If your body is not aligned with what's going on, if you're feeling some angst over something, listen to that, because we as women are born with an intuition, which is why most of us, not everybody can create life. We have a maternal instinct in us for a reason. We tend to ignore it when it comes to ourselves, but we do it with our children and other people's children. But if you feel something is off, it usually is off.
Yeah.
And listen to that and then act upon it. Even if it's a slow little thing, act upon it. Protect yourself.
Why didn't you stay for the children though? Most women would stay for the children. Okay, the children is there, so let me stay for the
Yes.
children.
So I did stay actually. I
Okay.
stayed for many years because remember this went on for 5 to 6 years. I
Mhm.
stayed for the children. It took me a good 2 years, and what happened was, like I said, it escalated.
Yeah.
So he started off, again, there was strategy. He started off very slowly, but by the time I left, I knew that if I didn't leave, I wouldn't be alive in a week,
Yeah.
because I couldn't control my mind at that point. He had me, the whole gaslighting term. He had me running in circles. Physically, I wasn't well. We would go out to dinner, and I'd have a sip or two of a cocktail, and I'd wake up on a bathroom floor, and I didn't know how I
Yeah.
got there. So things were happening to me that, I'm the kind of person, when there's an accident on the street, I run
Yeah.
to it. When somebody's having a seizure,
Yeah.
I run to it because I know medical emergencies, and I
Right.
had to do that. I had to do triage on my own self,
Yeah.
and I knew something was wrong, and I had to escape the situation.
Yeah.
And even my daughter, she was 12 at the time, and she's very sharp. And she said to
Yeah.
me, "Go. I will be fine. Go." And so what I did was I didn't leave and disappear. I
Yeah.
went every single morning to wake her up for school. I got her dressed for
Oh,
school. Oh, yeah. I was scared to death.
interesting.
But I drove in the dark from one
Yeah.
house to another
Mm.
because she was entering high school. And I knew, as a mother, I would not let my children think I abandoned them. So
Yeah.
I still
Yeah.
showed up. Like I
Yeah.
said, I had to make sure that they knew my roots were still in the ground. So I showed up.
Yeah.
I took her to school. Then I would go to prayer services and I would connect with God and all
Yeah.
that I needed to do. And I started setting myself up within a month and a half, I got into my own apartment. But I made sure that I picked up my child at
Yeah.
school and I went back and I made sure both my kids were fed and they had their
Yeah.
snacks and she did her homework. And then I didn't sleep at the house.
Okay. Right.
So I made sure I wasn't near him. I didn't eat anything from the house. I made her lunch at the house I was sleeping at that was safe. So
Yeah.
I did as much as I possibly could without being in the same vicinity as this person.
Did the law gets involved in this?
I tried to, but they wouldn't give me a restraining order.
Okay.
DCF showed up at the door because I spoke with a police officer, and there's a safe in the room, and they didn't look in the safe.
Okay.
But now my children are aware of what's going on.
Oh. Okay.
And they're older, they're adults, and she chooses not to be around him because she knows it's not safe.
Yeah. Yeah.
And you know, and it's hard. It's a hard situation because I try and even make excuses now because I feel for any child who doesn't have a good feeling about their parent. I don't want that
Yeah.
to be the case, but the generation now, they're so smart and they're very
Yeah. I
intuitive.
tell you, right?
They
Yeah.
really are, and they're intuitive, and she's like, it is what it is,
Yeah.
and as long as I'm here and I'm the strength of what my kids need, no matter what. And I always said, nobody's going to stop me from loving people in
yeah,
general.
yeah.
I don't carry hate. I carry forgiveness. I'm still working on that piece, of course.
All right.
Um, but, I realized that I survived for a reason.
Yeah,
And, I from the floor to the door, there's a reason for that because
yeah, yeah.
I
I'm
did.
gonna come to that. I'm
Okay.
gonna, I'm
So,
gonna come to that because
okay.
I like the concept,
Okay.
or I'm seeing it in my mind. But you're gonna
Yeah.
explain it to me. But look, you
Hmm.
might have alluded to this, but
Hmm.
how do you balance? How did you balance being a mother? You were
Hmm.
there,
Hmm.
especially when you were actually there
Hmm.
physically, and
Hmm.
being abused. How do you get that balance together?
When you're a parent and you have been working so hard on making sure your kids were okay in every sense from day one, I think it's just, I'm just a very determined, resilient person, I've realized.
Yeah.
So I have two kids that are special needs.
Okay.
And from the moment they were in my womb, even, I
Yeah.
was bedridden. I had hard deliveries.
Yeah.
One was developmentally delayed. The other one had other issues. So I had a whole team of doctors and teachers
Okay.
um, and advocates for my kids. So, and I'd fight the school board for their rights or the doctors and whatever it was.
Mm.
So I was already, that's who I am. Like I said, I'm the type that runs to an emergency. I don't run away
Yeah.
from it.
Right.
So I don't know, somewhere in my brain, I was able to make the distinction between the two.
Yeah. Yeah.
And, no matter what was going to happen, I was going to show up for my children.
Yeah.
And I showed up for not just my children, but other people's children too.
Yeah.
Because, I'm an advocate for other
Okay.
people's kids and special needs kids. And, now I'm an advocate for women that are abused. It's just who I am. I come from a long line of strong female ancestors.
I love that.
And, I say that that blood is running through me. I mean, we all are.
Yeah.
And that blood runs through us.
Yeah.
And I stand on their shoulders, so to speak. And, I have pictures of them all over my home.
Yeah.
And I look at their pictures and I talk to them. And when I'm having a weak moment,
Mm.
I look at them and I can almost hear what they would say at that moment. And I think that if we can tap into that, our ancestors and the lineage that we all come from,
Yeah.
there's wisdom there.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, for me, I had no choice. I just
Yeah.
did it.
You
But
sound Caribbean. I love that.
well, I spent half my life over there. So in
Right.
the Caribbean, in the islands, yeah, I loved it. The Leeward
Uh,
Islands. Hmm.
I love
Yeah.
that. I love
Hmm.
that.
It's
Look,
true.
look. It's nice that you're giving back. You have said that.
Hmm.
But before I go to this, from the floor to the door,
Hmm.
let me ask you this whole thing about the lasting effect that it might be having on you.
Hmm.
Because it might be mental
Hmm.
challenges. Depression,
Hmm.
post traumatic,
Yeah.
stress disorder. I heard that. Yes.
Yeah.
Right? So talk
Yeah.
to me about what's going on there.
Okay. So I was diagnosed within a month of my leaving. Now, I think maybe it was 2 weeks even,
Yeah.
with chronic PTSD.
Okay.
And, most people don't realize that there's a PTSD and a chronic PTSD.
Yeah.
And, I'll explain PTSD is if you have one experience
Yeah.
perhaps that's traumatic and, you're either in an involvement of some sort of an emergency or you see something that's horribly traumatic,
Mhm.
it's PTSD. Chronic PTSD is when you experience thing over time.
Right.
What I experienced was well over a long period of time. And so I was diagnosed with chronic PTSD, depression at that time, a little bit of ADHD, but
Okay.
that's where grounding comes in.
Yeah.
Um, so my nervous system has definitely had some effects,
Yeah.
not only because of what was done to me. I never knew what to expect. When he would come home, I wouldn't know who I'd get.
Yeah.
Um, I didn't when we would go out to dinner, I didn't know what to expect. I thought it would just be he and I, and before I know it, it's a group of people and he's meeting strangers at the
Yeah.
bar and so I didn't there was a lot that went on. And
Yeah.
so I can get triggered easily. Um,
Okay.
I'd be working on my patients and I would have a panic attack. And
Oh,
yeah, and you have to learn how to manage that.
yeah,
And
definitely.
I did, and I still do. And that's the kind of stuff I want to teach other people, because we still have to live our lives.
Yeah,
We do. And no matter what you do for a living, and being a mother, you're always on. Being a parent, you're always on.
yeah,
So, you can excuse yourself for 5 minutes, but most people that have any sort of abuse, you will have panic attacks throughout the day.
yeah,
It is what it is, as my kid would
yeah,
say, and you have to learn how to manage that.
yeah,
And so that's a big one for me. Um, uh, you know, the physical part of it. The mental part of it is changing the words in my head.
okay,
So,
yeah,
for many, many years, he would even say, "Oh, you wanted that. You wanted this."
yeah, yeah,
Well, you never said no, or because he didn't hear me,
yeah,
or when I said no, he would quiet me down or put his hand
yeah,
over whatever it was,
yeah,
and so in my head, I've had to change those words and change
yeah,
his voice.
okay,
So I've for years been listening to music and podcasts and
yeah, all right.
all of that. Right, your podcast is great. Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you. Right.
It's true.
Hey, yeah, I
It's
know,
true.
right? You have been listening, right?
That's great. Oh, absolutely. I was listening to Stephanie Olson the other day. Yeah,
Oh, cool.
she was a great one. Yeah, I took some notes on it, and absolutely. I liked a lot about that she talked about. It's
Yeah,
true.
thank you.
One of the lasting effects is self-esteem. I mean, there's no doubt about it, and
Yeah,
safety.
yeah,
And it has to be. I am safe, and I am protected,
yeah,
and I was protected all those times. I realized one day that I wasn't alone in all those moments that were really scary.
yeah.
But I was protected, because otherwise I wouldn't be here talking to you.
Right. Yeah, I love that.
Absolutely,
Yeah, I
it's
love
true.
that. Yeah, I love
It's
that.
true.
And as you said that, I well, you're listening to Canyouth Exploration, your topic in the podcast. I am Dr. Canyouth White,
Hmm.
talking to Michelle. Michelle, having said that, from the floor to
Hmm.
the door, I am conceptualizing that in my mind. I
Hmm.
don't want to tell you how I'm conceptualizing it.
Okay.
So I want you to tell me what's the
Okay.
concept there.
Okay. So while all this was happening, there was a lot of emotional abuse. There was a lot of verbal abuse.
Yeah.
There was a lot of shame thrown my way. So I would be crying and I would want to just quiet down. So I had a closet at the time where I could sit in the closet. So I would sit on the floor. I would kneel on the floor, in almost like a fetal position. I would pray on the floor.
Yeah. Okay.
I would hide, or if we were out at someone's house, I knew what they wanted eventually. I was either put on the floor or I would
Mm,
pass out on the floor. I would pretend I was sleeping. I
okay.
would
Mm.
I would either get sick or pretend I was getting sick so that no one would come near me.
Yeah. Yeah.
So that's that part of it. And then to the door, self-explanatory, because I
Yeah.
literally went, and I also slept in a room separate from him the last month on the floor in
Okay.
my own home.
Yeah.
And so I literally went from that floor to the door
Okay.
and and ran and walked out.
Yeah.
So, now it's a little different. Now I'm on the floor saying thank you for and I've
Yeah.
got that's my second book, and that's it's gratitude.
Oh,
It's
cool. Cool.
it's those moments of you put your knees to the ground and look up, and your hands are up in the air, and you're like, please talk to me, tell me, and let me know that I am protected and
Yeah.
I'm not alone,
Yeah.
and and thank you. That's the best thing we could say to ourselves is thank you.
Yeah. I'm not sure if you had gotten any other conceptualization of from the floor to the door. Let me ask that. Have you?
As far as what?
Um, Persons conceive
Mhm.
the term to mean something else.
No. It's usually no one's really told me. I'd love to hear your idea of it.
Okay. All right. Because my conceptualization of
Mhm.
it was okay, I've been being abused,
Mm,
right?
mhm. Mhm.
Physically.
Mhm.
It could be um, pushing on the floor and
Yes.
being abused.
Yeah.
And then, yeah, you walk out of that through the
Yes.
door.
That's exactly.
That's my
And
conceptualization.
and that really is what it is.
Okay.
And
Okay.
yeah.
I'm right.
Yeah.
Okay.
So right, exactly.
Yeah.
So that's exactly what it was.
Yeah. Yeah.
Correct.
Yeah.
Correct.
Yeah. Okay. I like the concept.
Mm-hmm.
I picked it up.
Mm-hmm.
But you talked about book,
Mm-hmm.
or books.
Mm-hmm.
Have you been writing?
Uh,
What's going on?
yes. So I've always been somebody who writes journals, not
Yeah.
consistently throughout the years, but enough throughout the years. But I will tell you. So this happened when I left right before quarantine,
Right.
and that was really tricky. And as a healthcare worker, it was even more so.
Yeah.
Um, so what I did was I started to put pen to paper again.
Yeah.
The old fashioned writing down, and just the action alone of that is very healing.
Yeah. Oh yes.
And so, and then I started to tell people what had happened, because remember, I told nobody.
Yeah.
I protected him, and I kept it
Oh
a
yeah.
secret, and
Mhm.
what have you. So
Yeah.
people suggested take what you have and create a book. So it just comes to be.
Yeah.
So I'm working on actually two now,
Oh
because
cool.
I, I I'm working on one, which is, the second one is a healing,
Yeah.
and yeah, and it's going to be titled the same thing, From the Floor to the Door.
I love that. I love it.
Yeah.
I love it so much.
Hmm.
It's a very good concept.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Hey, Michelle,
Yeah.
you're a strong woman, and you have
Thank you.
used your adversity to help others. You have been doing that, and I'm sure that others will be healed
Hmm.
through what have happened to you, and
Hmm.
others will understand, that hey, I need to
Hmm.
prevent this from happening based on what Michelle had gone through and had written about and spoke about.
Hmm.
So you're doing a good job, and I
Thank
want
you.
to applaud you for that. Hey,
Thank you.
and go
Mhm.
back to Jamaica, girl.
Oh my gosh, any moment I have, absolutely. It's a home away from home. I love it there.
I know,
I
right?
love it there.
I
Best
know.
people.
Yeah, I'm here in the United States, reaching out,
Hmm.
to you guys.
Yeah,
But Jamaica is always, a good
beautiful.
place, and yeah,
Hmm.
yeah, it's always home,
Hmm.
definitely. So,
Yes,
you go back there, right?
absolutely. I got to get my rum cake somewhere.
I know, right? We'll arrange
Love it.
that for you.
Oh my gosh, I'd love to.
All
Love
right.
to.
All right, Michelle, thanks for talking to me on Canyouth Exploration, your
Of
topic on the
course.
podcast, and stay strong, and
Thank you.
we'll talk again. Bye bye.
All right. Thank you. Bye bye.
So that was Michelle. She had said a lot, and she's a very strong woman, very strong personality, and she had a lot to share with you. And as you listen to this, you share it with those persons who might need to hear what Michelle had gone through, to empower them, and to inspire them. And it's important for you to help others through what you have heard, and through your adversity. If you have had some adversity going on and it relates to sex abuse, domestic violence. Thanks for listening. Thanks for watching Canyouth Exploration, your topic in the podcast. Goodbye.